All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started, and I'll pass it off to Greg for introductions.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Francis. I'm a transportation planner with the City of Hoboken in the Department of Transportation and Parking. I'm also the city's project manager for the Curb Reimagined, which is an exciting curbside mobility and parking action plan that we'll be discussing tonight. I'm joined from the city by our Director of Transportation and Parking, Ryan Sharp. And we have a great team from Kimley Horn, so I'll pass it on to Robert Farron, who's going to introduce his team and start the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you all, and good evening, and welcome to our meeting about the Curb Reimagined. And if we go to the next slide here, I just want to quickly introduce our team. I'm joined by Helen Schuda, Chris Dahman, as well as Gabe Kovac. I also want to have a special thanks to some of our partners on this project, Populous Technologies, Civic Eye Collaborative, as well as Ingenuity Engineering. So what our agenda is going to look like this evening, we're going to start with a short video to help to explain what we mean by curbside management and what we mean by as we start to look at curbside as well as parking, curbside parking mobility in Hoboken. Talk a little bit about the plan and its process. Start to talk about some of the existing conditions analysis and understand how the curb is currently managed today. And then we're going to jump into, certainly the main part of this conversation, which is to hear your feedback. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit of debrief and next steps. So for those that just joined, we're about to start a video here. Listen in and hear about Hoboken curbside management, parking as well as mobility. Oh, first, some meeting guidelines. So please use the raise hand feature. We're going to want everyone to certainly participate. Please listen with an open mind, and certainly we want to hear different types of ideas. We certainly want to make sure that we have that kind of discourse, but not necessarily to the individual giving that idea. When we are in this virtual setting, there is the opportunity to talk over each other. So please use that, certainly use the hand feature and then mute yourself when you're not talking to try to mitigate any kind of background noise. And then when we get into the Q&A, so everyone's muted right now, we're going to go through this short presentation. Once we get to that discussion period, you can interact in a couple different ways. You can use the raise hand feature. We'll start to take people off of mute. We're going to have an interactive exercise as well, and you can also certainly use the Q&A feature as well to provide feedback. Also, as we get into that interactive exercise, it's best to be on a desktop computer. However, if you're not, if you're on your phone or an iPad, there's certainly certainly other ways, whether it's the Q&A or again raising your hand. We want to make sure we hear from everybody this evening. So with that, we'll play the video.
In Hoboken, our streets are alive with activity every day. While we might not notice it, there's a valuable public space between the curb and driving lanes, the curbside. We use it for parking, loading, bus stops, school pickup and drop-off, biking, and other new things like outdoor dining. While we often overlook this space, it's serving important roles for everyone in Hoboken. That's why Hoboken is creating a curbside mobility and parking action plan. We want to recognize the true value of the curbside and make it work better for everyone. Curbside management is about making the best use of limited space along our streets. This means accommodating everything from parking to loading zones, emergency access, pedestrian spaces, bike lanes, and more. It's about recognizing how valuable our curb space is and optimizing our curb space to benefit everyone in Hoboken. Here are some scenarios that show the value of managing the curbside. Managed parking. Providing parking is critical to drivers in Hoboken, and that's why having rules that make it fair for everyone is important. Having a well-designed mix of paid and timed parking and permit parking optimizes curbside management by ensuring a higher turnover of parking spaces, which increases access for more users and support local businesses by making it easier for customers to find short-term parking. No parking zones. When drivers park in no parking zones, others can't safely use crosswalks at intersections. When we follow the rules and enforce them, people can safely get where they need to go. Bike lanes. We often see vehicles parked or loading in bike lanes, creating hazards for cyclists. In contrast, when bike lanes are clear and well marked, they promote a healthy and sustainable transportation mode, reinforcing our commitment to provide diverse transportation options to residents, businesses, and visitors. Loading zones. We've heard it a lot. Double parking is a way of life in Hoboken. It's time for that to change. When delivery drivers can easily find areas to load and unload, Hoboken's businesses can thrive. Emergency access. Obstructions in travel lanes due to illegal parking can delay critical responses. Through clear, unblocked access, supported by high visibility markings and strict enforcement, we provide our first responders with the unobstructed access they require. Passenger pickup and drop-off zones. Passenger pickup and drop-off zones, particularly around the school zones and public attractions, can be less safe and chaotic when there aren't rules in place to manage pickup and drop-off. Thoughtful curbside management can help create a safer, more predictable environment for everyone. Transit efficiency. When vehicles block bus stops, buses have to load and unload passengers in the travel lane. This causes delays and safety concerns for all road users. Clear stops help make public transit more reliable. Demand for the curbside in the city has been increasing due to changing customer habits and technological innovations. Rising trends like food delivery services, e-commerce, and app-based ride shares all require curbside space. These new demands require the city to rethink how the curbside is managed to create a safer, more efficient, and productive public flow of traffic. Hoboken is creating a plan to create a curbside that works well for all those who use it, now and in the future. By addressing the complexities of curbside management, Hoboken is creating a safer, more efficient, and accessible environment for everyone. Through careful planning, enforcement, and community cooperation, we're not just managing our curbs, we're fostering a more livable, sustainable city. Join us in supporting effective curbside management for a better Hoboken.
Thanks again to our partners at Civic Eye Collaborative for helping to put that together. We're also going to put a link in the chat for those that may not have been able to see the video or on their phones and want to see that later. That video is also posted on our project site. So what is the Curb Reimagined? Let's talk a little bit about the plan background and process. And really we have to start when we think about this planning effort, previous planning efforts undertaken by the city. And you see some of those on the screen here too, where we are taking elements of whether it's the Vision Zero action plan, the Hoboken Street Design Guide, the master plan, the climate action plan. All these plans speak to curbside management and mobility planning and looking at on and off street parking. And so we are leaning on these guiding documents where I'm sure many of you were involved in these as well. And we are using these to help develop this plan focused on curbside mobility and parking. This plan is anticipated to analyze how our curb space is managed today in Hoboken, and we're going to go into some more detail about that in a minute, and how we can plan as a city to adapt the curbside to meet the needs for everyone. As was mentioned in the video, our curbside demand is changing. How we transact business is changing. How we receive goods and services is changing, and therefore our curbside needs to change as well. As was mentioned with previous planning efforts, we want to align our curbside management goals with the city's goals for safety, mobility, and climate action. And we want to examine the supply and performance of both the off-street system, whether that's city parking garages or private parking garages, and that with the on-street system as well. When we think about curbside management, we think about the potential uses of the curbside beyond typical uses such as vehicle storage, loading zones. We think about passenger pickup and drop-off zones, still having a place for quick access, short-term parking. How can transit be incorporated into our curbs? And then how can non-vehicular uses like bike share stations and parklets, on-street dining, we want to reimagine what this public space, this valuable public space, how it can perform for Hoboken citizens, workers, and visitors. Some of the plan elements we're looking at, we're currently in the existing conditions phase, and we've been reviewing the city's municipal code. Often a city manages and operates and enforces parking in the curbside. It's based on the current legislation. So we have taken a deep dive into both Hoboken's code as well as state code. We digitized the curb, and we're going to show you some of those results here in a minute. We created a digital twin of what is currently, how the curb is currently managed in Hoboken. We're looking at parking system performance, both on and off street, and we're taking a deep dive into your residential permit parking program and how that program is currently managed and how permits are currently utilized throughout the city. And then we want to look ahead at future parking demand. There's a lot of great redevelopment occurring, whether it's on the north end, around Hoboken Terminal, and everywhere, certainly everywhere in between. And how do those new developments create new demands, and where do we need to plan for future parking curbside as well as mobility infrastructure? We've also been looking at industry best practices and looking at cities throughout the country on how they currently manage the curb. Hoboken is very unique in that your curb is in such high demand, and there is such a high demand throughout the city. But we're looking at different cities with similar characteristics to understand how they manage the curb, the technologies they use, the operational, whether it's around enforcement, how they're pricing the curb, et cetera. We're looking at their off-street parking system. We're looking at mobility in general, whether it's bike infrastructure, shared mobility, micromobility. And then we're looking at operations and understanding staffing levels and resources to make sure that whatever recommendations are put in place, that they're properly resourced, and that we can maintain, we can maintain a high level of compliance with all the posted regulations and make sure that we create a safe environment for everyone. We're in the community engagement phase right now, and we've already heard from a lot of you through the surveys. We'll also be having a public meeting next month that we'll talk more about here at the end of the conversation. This is all going to lead into what we hear from the public, from you tonight, through the survey and public meetings, through our industry best practices and our existing conditions analysis, several policy, program, and infrastructure strategies that we'll be recommending as part of this effort for both the curbside, on-street parking, off-street parking, as well as the mobility system throughout Hoboken. We're completing our data collection phase. We started earlier this year. We're in our phase 1 community engagement. From that, we will be developing recommendations over the summer, and then we'll be coming back to the community and certainly meeting people where they are, again, through survey, virtual, and in-person engagement to help test those recommendations and understand which recommendations we should be prioritizing. That will all go into the action plan development this fall and then plan adoption later on this winter. So we're kind of in that first first phase, certainly first phase of work, and then we'll be moving through the summer and starting to look at what recommendations make sense to improve access and safety and efficiency in the system. So the digital curb, what have we learned so far? It's important for us to bring data to the table and really understand how is the curb currently managed in Hoboken. For those that live in Hoboken, and you certainly understand your street and your neighborhood. If you own a business or work in Hoboken, you understand those areas. But comprehensively, how does the curb currently? What are the different uses that are facilitating access to the curb? Just to orient you to this slide, there's a lot on this slide. We're also going to show you spatially through some maps how the curb is currently, again, on a block by block basis, how it's currently managed. But what you see here on the left, we inventoried just over 260,000 linear feet of curb space. That's how much curb space is in the city of Hoboken. That is inclusive of everything from the crosswalk to crosswalk, both sides of the street, the entire square mile of Hoboken. What you see on the pie chart here is how the curb is currently managed. And the couple numbers pop out here. About 40% of the curb is currently managed as no stopping or parking. Now, that could be a travel lane, that could be a curb cut for a driveway, that could be no parking for a fire hydrant, that could be no parking for a crosswalk or actually areas within a crosswalk. So all the above, all the areas where you're not legally allowed to stop or stand makes up about 39–40% of the available curb in Hoboken. The majority of current curb space is utilized for parking. 24% is for permit parking. Those are permit only spaces. And then a mirror of that, 24% is both permit as well as paid parking. And of course, we know, certainly in Hoboken, we have one side of the street that's permit only. The other side of the street is that hybrid. Certainly permit holders can park there, but also visitors can park there and then pay, pay for parking. Then we have traditional paid parking. That meter parking in the commercial district, that accounts for about 7% of, again, all the available curb in Hoboken. So by and large, split between no parking, no stopping, and then traditional forms of vehicle storage of some type of parking. And then you see all these other uses. Loading zones, about 2%. ADA parking, about 1%. Mobility, whether it's bus stops, bike share, EV charging stations, bike parking, outdoor dining, 0.4%. And then some kind of restricted parking, whether it's for city vehicles, school staff vehicles, that's coming in around 2%. So by and large, again, permit parking, paid parking, flavors of those both. And then also looking at no stopping and parking. It's good for us to understand how that curb is currently managed as we start to think about what opportunities and challenges we have throughout the city. This map is a compilation of all those uses. I do not expect everyone to be able to understand each of these blocks. We're going to go through each of the uses. Do know that on our project site, and again, we've dropped that link in the chat, there is an interactive map, and that's another way that we want to get your feedback. And this mirror map is available on our project site, and it helps to orient you to where all the uses are, and helps to orient you to provide that great feedback. We're going to have a couple of maps here we're going to go through, and then we'll start to get into discussion. So these maps will flip through, show where your paid parking is and where your permit parking is, and there's some overlap. So if we put these together, they would overlap on 50% of the blocks. Again, knowing that some, we have one side of the street's permit only, one's hybrid. The no stopping parking map looks really red. And that's because there are a lot of curb cuts and a lot of fire hydrants and a lot of crosswalks. And we want to make sure that we account for those items. The items that are longer, those are typically travel lanes. those are areas where there's just not enough room for parking because we need to get vehicles through. As we go to the next slide, you'll see the spatial distribution of ADA parking, and that is very much throughout the city. And those, and then we have loading in the middle, and there's about 120 to 130 loading zones throughout the city. That's something that is certainly high on the minds of a lot of folks, understanding that everyone gets Amazon packages and everyone gets on-demand deliveries these days. And so how can our loading zones perform differently now that our needs have changed? And then we have a slide here on mobility and dining. And that's showing, again, bus stops, bike share, bike parking, EV charging, and then those, again, those select permitted both parklets as well as on-street dining facilities. This gives you a nice distribution. Again, this is all online. You can zoom in and out. We're going to have a map here in a minute where you can zoom in and out and give us real-time feedback. But please do know that these maps, all together, you can turn on and off these layers as you see fit. Those are all on our project site. So you go hobokennj.gov/curb management. On that site, you can find out information about the plan, upcoming events, and most importantly, the survey. Survey opened up at the beginning of May and is going to be ongoing through the end of June. So the months of May and June are our phase 1 engagement months, where we want to hear from you and your neighbors, and again, people who live, work, and play in Hoboken. And we want to understand how you use the system and what are some of the opportunities and challenges you see with the system. Please take that survey. Please use the interactive map. We've heard tonight there's some location-based, like first ward. There's certain areas where everything's in high demand, but there could be areas that are even in higher demand. We want to hear that. We want to understand where you have loading challenges, safety challenges, parking challenges, etc. And then the video you heard and saw earlier is also on the website. So please share that with your friends. We want folks to certainly understand that this process is ongoing. We've had almost 300 surveys filled out already. We want to see a lot more surveys filled out. We've got over, I think it's probably 90 to 100 pins on the interactive map. We want to see a lot more pins on the map. So you can use the QR code here as well to go to the project site. And then lastly, we have an in-person meeting coming up. It will be a similar format, so don't feel obligated to go, but we're gonna have a similar format, in-person open house. It's gonna be on June 17th, that's a Monday evening from 6:30 to 8 at the Hoboken Multi-Service Center in the community meeting space. So again, we're gonna wanna hear your feedback and understand kind of, again, the opportunities and challenges around parking, curbside management, as well as mobility in the city of Hoboken. Your feedback is going to help us develop a plan that's going to help, certainly, serve the community, residents, visitors, and workers. So as I said, all this analysis, the survey, our existing conditions analysis, I hope folks found that, I'd say at the very least, I'd say interesting about how is the curb currently used in the city. We're going to use that, your feedback, industry best practices. We're going to help develop those draft recommendations. That'll be coming later on this summer. And again, visit the project site, stay in touch with the city, expect to hear more about that in the fall as we come back out to the community and hear your feedback on those draft recommendations and strategies. With that, that's the end of our presentation. We thank you so much for joining this evening, for offering your comments on Mural, as well as through the chat, as well as raise your hand and coming off of mute. Greg or Ryan, any closing thoughts before we adjourn this evening?
I'll just, echo Robert, thank you everyone for coming out and providing feedback. If you've already taken the survey, thank you. Provided feedback via the map, thank you. If not, please do. It's a really easy way to provide some great feedback for the project, which we're hoping to get, and hopefully we can see you at the in-person meeting as well. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.